Take it away.
Taking it away. Okay, well, thank you all for attending this session. I'm going to speak to you about self-regulated learning and independent studies. My co-presenter is Lynette Nickelberry Stewart. She is not here today, but she is, I guess, the primary lead in this study. And she works, we both work at SUNY Empire State College. She's in human services, working primarily with undergraduate students. And I work with, in graduate studies, the education program, special education, and the Master of Arts in Teaching program. And so we're collaborating on this because self-regulated learning is really important across student populations, no matter what age. So what is self-regulated learning? First, let's start here. I'm sorry, I'm looking at 2 slides, which is always fun. So when you're talking about self-regulated learning, it's really dealing with the student's side of responsibility in terms of dealing with their learning. It's grounded in social cognitive theoretical frameworks. It's a cognitive, affective, and behavioral process that encourages and supports the realization of academic or learning goals. Educational psychologists have underscored that self-regulation is a key variable in predicting academic achievement. Specifically, self-regulated learners are characterized their ability to set and meet goals, monitor their progress, and seek assistance, and initiate and direct their learning efforts towards acquisition of new knowledge. Self-regulation has been shown to mitigate declines in academic self-efficacy and academic performance, protecting students against academic burnout. And so when you think of self-regulated learning, you're thinking of that student who keeps up with all of their due dates. They are reaching out to you, they're showing up for class. And then obviously, if they're not self-regulated, they're depending on you for a lot of those things, reminders and all of that. So why did we look at independent studies? So independent studies are very specific type of course, and our understanding was that independent studies may require more self-regulation even than general studies where you go to a classroom or you're taking a class with a number of other people. So you're one-on-one with the instructors. It's co-created, ideally it's co-created content tailored to student interests and learning needs. It requires self-motivation and initiative. There's little or no research in guided independent studies and self-regulated learning, which is why we wanted to take a look at it. Now, I think it's very important also because when you think about the environment in which we're teaching right now, studies, especially for all of the campuses where you had students actually showing up to class, a lot of your courses might have felt like independent studies after a while because the students were somewhat isolated, in last spring and even now if they're not coming to classes. So I think this is important beyond just dealing with your typical independent study. Okay. So our research questions. Are there significant differences in self-regulated learning across demographic variables among independent study students? What are the self-regulated learning strategies used by students in independent study courses? What is the relationship between self-regulated learning subcomponents and GPA and course completion among independent study students? Are there course characteristics that facilitate the use of self-regulated learning strategies? And how do independent study instructors conceptualize the relationship between independent study assignments and self-regulated learning? So Empire State College is one of 13 arts and sciences colleges in the state of New York. We have 35 locations, so we're located all over New York State. One moment, please. We're located all over New York State. We were founded in 1971 by the SUNY Board of Trustees. One second. So we have primarily adult learners. So the people who come even to the undergraduate courses are typically students who have been in the working world for some time. They are in their 20s and 30s. I've had students who are even retired from one field and they're coming into another. These are not typically students who just graduated from high school and applied to college and so are coming straight out of a high school setting. We have many study groups, residencies, online blended learning, and guided independent study courses. So that is the way our system is set up at the undergraduate level. And I think some things can get a little confused because when you think of online and then you have study groups would show up, but online is beginning to encompass more areas. So especially now during this pandemic, a lot of what was typical coursework done in class and at home, there's a lot more that's online now that's kind of automatic, where even if you meet face to face, you would still submit your work online. So a lot more hybrid work is going on. So some of our definitions of the separations that we used to have between the types of studies is kind of changing. So this study is broken into a few different sections. So we sent out surveys, and we also have surveys to both faculty and students, and we have also interviewed or in the process of interviewing both faculty and students. So in breaking up the work, my colleague Lynette concentrated on focusing on the student perspectives, and I concentrated on focusing on faculty perspectives. So what I'm about to share with you, it is a result of her work in both interviewing and looking at the questionnaire that were given to students. So the measures, we looked at critical thinking, study time and place, motivation and task value, beliefs, and test anxiety. So this project was launched in 2017, where there were 302 student surveys using the well-researched motivated strategies for learning questionnaire developed by Pintrick and DeGroot to measure student self-reports of motivational orientations and use of learning strategies in college courses. The MSLQ which is the short form of what I just said, was designed to uncover behavioral and cognitive elements of academic self-regulation and key components in predicting student learning and academic performance. The MSLQ in totality consists of 15 subscales, 81 total questions designed to be used together or independently. So when thinking about the subscales, those are listed on the slide. Critical thinking skills is application of previous knowledge to new situations, or the critical evaluation of ideas. Study time and place refers to managing and using appropriate study time and environment. Motivation refers to internal or external drive towards completing a task or meeting a goal. Task value beliefs is the perception of the usefulness, importance, interest, and cost of a particular task. And test anxiety, worry, and concern over taking exams. These components were chosen for their empirical support as crucial contributors to academic achievement. Grade point average and course completion data was collected to establish the relationship between components of self-regulation and academic success in independent study students. In total, our survey consisted of 33 items scored on a 7-point Likert scale. And it was slightly modified in wording for independent study courses. So the findings from that survey. With demographics, men had a higher grade point average, but you have to, think critically about that as well, because we had more women respond to the survey than men. So it could simply be that because there was a smaller range of men who even responded, though, and the ones who responded had higher GPAs than maybe the general population of men at the college. We don't know. Students 45 plus had higher completion rates and grade point average. That's something that's worth delving more into. White students had higher completion rates and grade point averages. Again, that's something to consider. Part of it may be because we have students who have had less opportunity, but we also have more white students. So, and maybe more white students actually answered the survey. So we have to think critically about that. Correlations. Extrinsic goal motivation was related to completion, such that more extrinsic motivation was associated with lower completion. So that is motivation that was related more towards grades or some outside extrinsic motivation was associated with a lower GPA, because the student was not really there because they had an intrinsic desire to learn, or their intrinsic need to understand this information, be it related to improving at their jobs or whatever. Higher organization predicted lower completion, and that's something we should think about. Why would higher organization predict lower completion? Now, student perspectives. The common strategies that they used in independent studies included early planning, note-taking, mapping assignments, scaffolding assignments, help seeking, asking questions, and avoiding independent studies that were for difficult or unfamiliar topics. So you can choose what format you want to take a particular study. So if a person knows that for a math course, they really need to be in person, then they may not use the independent study format for that type of topic, if that's the case. In thinking about, and this is in terms of the focus groups and interviews that Lynette did, she found that in terms of student responses explaining why and how they addressed each of these components to self-regulated learning, she found that time and place, there were certain key things that students said. For example, one student said, "I study everywhere." So we have students, remember, they're working adults, and they may have children, families. So wherever they can get free time, they may decide to take out their books and keep flashcards with them, or whatever they need to do in order to make their work accessible to them. Independent studies, another student said, independent studies becomes a part of your everyday life. When I have time or can make time, I get it done. And in thinking through that, we were reflecting, as Lynette and I discussed this, it could be that because these are working adults and because they come with their own purposes and reasons for taking these courses, a lot of it may be having to do with their chosen career. They actually incorporate that into their lives in ways that students who just got out of undergraduate may not, or when in terms of even their choices for choosing an independent study course versus the general offering. It may be a special purpose behind that. Their use of rehearsal was also noted. Some students said that most independent studies require papers and projects that do not require rote memorization. But once I have completed the project, it is committed to memory. I can discuss it without looking at my notes. So you notice that the issue isn't test taking, because in independent studies, generally tests are not given. However, there is an understanding that memorization and incorporating this information into your psychology, into what you can readily pull up and access and use, is very important, and projects are seen as an important part to do it, important way to get this done, even by the students. Elaboration. Students seek out real-life resources to expand their understanding of concepts. One student noted, "I was fortunate enough to have friends and family who work in the finance industry." So the student would say, "Hey, I'm taking this course and struggling with this. Can you explain what they mean when they said this or that?" So that's another example in terms of elaboration, where you see the independent study student taking the content into their daily lives and really incorporating it into themselves in a way that maybe they would not have in a course where they hadn't actually chosen. Maybe it's part of a general offering. Here, in terms of critical thinking, students applying prior knowledge to analyze, compare, or contrast against course content. One student noted, "Being a woman in the human service field, I have experienced things that made me say, no, that's not how it works in real life. The book is discussing an ideal, but when you actually put people into place, that's not always what we encounter." And there you get that thinking that's carrying beyond the actual coursework, and I just want to get this assignment done, to how does this actually really work in life? Now, for the faculty perspective, there was also an open-ended survey and interviews, and I'm still in the process of doing interviews. So they answered 9 open-ended questions. Which addressed conceptualization of guided independent study, commonly used assignments in guided independent study, justification and goals for using those particular assignments, most effective learning strategies, learning activities students use for increasing understanding and learning, and retention of new content and skills. So they answered those questions, and so some of here are the demographics of that faculty population who responded to the survey. They had between 6 and 50 years in higher education. So none of these were brand new, and only one of those had just 6 years of experience. 85% had taught more than 10 years, and 15% taught between 5 and 10 years. So for faculty perspective, what is a guided independent study? 67% identified the work as being self-directed. So the key is self-motivated learning. It's designed for motivated individuals who can manage their progress in a study independently of a rigid schedule designed by the college or the instructor. There are no class meetings, and information is not delivered by the instructor, but instead the student works independently on reading and writing assignments. So the majority of instructors felt that independent studies really required self-regulation. 61% referred to the flexibility and individualization that happens in an independent study. So they indicated varying degrees of structure. There's a variety of flexibility within learning activities. You are the only student, so various characteristics of the studies can be individualized for a student. The professor can be as involved or as hands-off as the student needs. So that gets to, of course, the flexibility, but you can see where self-regulation comes in, because the student gets to make these decisions. The student gets to decide how involved they want the instructor to be, as opposed to the instructor necessarily dictating that communication. 78%, almost 80% of faculty indicated that interaction with the instructor is required though. So they're expected to meet by phone several times throughout the term to discuss the material and work. The student should plan on being in contact 4 or 5 times during the term, and it's an opportunity for a student to work one-on-one with a mentor. So notice the language is still loose. They should meet several times, be in contact 4 or more times, but the student gets to have a lot of leeway in deciding when and where and how that will happen. So in terms of, let me look at my time. How am I doing?
You're in good shape. You're in good shape. You got
Okay.
plenty of time. Yep.
Okay, good.
15 minutes.
Oh, okay, excellent. So in terms of the types of assignments faculty use to encourage self-regulated learning, there were several types of assignments that scored high. The first was assignment revisions. This particular instructor says, I allow students to improve their assignments after they receive my feedback to earn a higher grade. It's not really about the grade though, it's about learning. So what I am really doing is helping them gain confidence while they gain a deeper understanding of the topic. So this activity really just encourages the student to take a second look at their work, to take ownership of the learning process, look at their errors and focus on correcting their understanding, figuring things out, not just doing the assignment, kind of leaving it to the professor to say yay or nay and move on. 83% of faculty used assignments that related to application of a theory or formulas to real world issues, examples or problems. This instructor said, in most of what I teach, my objective is to help a student learn a framework for analysis and then apply it. If they don't play with it, they won't take it with them. So this speaks to the type of crafting assignments that require a certain type of thinking on the part of the student. I'm not seeing, I can't see the comments or anything, but Chris.
Yeah, so there was a Roberta asked, are there office hours when students can meet with the faculty?
Yes, so from my understanding and speaking to the faculty thus far, they will tell the students they have set office hours, some of them, but many of them will they'll contact back and forth through email and they'll just set up a time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had at least one person say she specifically has the student choose the time and the how. So whether it's going to be via Zoom or Teams that we use or by phone, so that the student will be there. So it's not the instructor saying, you have to meet me this time, this place. The student really takes more control of that, but the faculty will give a window or just, just make an appointment as you would make an appointment. Well, when are you free? When am I free? And coordinating those times.
Mm-hmm. And then I was curious, you said 78% of the faculty said interaction was expected. And I was wondering, what the other 22% are doing. Are they just basically setting up assignments and then grading them? And then they don't really need to meet with the students at all?
Well, that's a good question. So the issue there is, let me see if I can go back to where that was said. Okay, so notice back here, a clue that everybody doesn't believe the same thing. The last comment here, where there are no class meetings and information is not delivered by the instructor, but instead the student works independently on reading and writing assignments. That comment told me that that particular instructor might not be following this ideal that many other instructors had of we're going to meet regularly and I'm going to help walk you through this. And something that students did mention in one of our focus groups was they had a harder time in courses where the faculty member was not as communicative. So we do have instances where faculty are not as communicative, but we're finding that self-regulated learners actually require some interaction. Being self-regulated doesn't just mean from the student perspective, it doesn't necessarily just mean you're doing everything on your own, but it does mean that you can reach out and you get to decide when to reach out, but it doesn't mean you're isolated. That's what we're seeing so far. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And then I was curious, how many students do faculty typically have uh,
As
independently? Yeah.
so as independent study, from what I understand, there can be large numbers. We have some faculty who that's their primary student population. They deal with independent studies because of their content. Um, but this is undergraduate, and I'm a graduate faculty, so I don't deal with independent studies really at all, unless the student is like off schedule for some unforeseen reason and they need help. So they'll take our course, but it'll be by themselves. Um, some faculty do have an undergrad have very high student load, so that could contribute to some independent studies not being as guided and as um, involved. Like the faculty might have less involvement because of that. I've heard complaints, but that's not my world. So that's why I wish Lynette was here for that, to explain that reality of our undergraduate faculty. But it can be rather harrowing from what I understand.
Great. Thanks. Yep. That was it so far.
Okay, good. Thanks for the questions. So 83% of the faculty also used journaling. They asked their students to take reading notes and incorporate them into reflective journal essays that make explicit connections between assigned readings, the student's life experiences, and current events. So that was a widely used format. And then reflective writing, which is sort of like journaling, but not necessarily. I like reflective writing for its self-realizations and opportunity to express oneself openly. But if you notice, both of those strategies really ask students to take the information that they've learned and then manipulate it into a format that is useful for them personally, to personalize what they've learned, for how they will use it, how it applies to their life, how it's changed the way they think. 72% of faculty also used opportunities for formative assessment and corrective feedback. And then that goes back to the assignment revisions for self-correction. But in conversation with the faculty, they also noted that when they're meeting with students, that's also the time when they ask them about what they've read and correct misunderstandings and explain things. So that one-on-one interaction between the instructor and the student is also a time for formative assessment during that conversation that they have. Scaffolding assignments was seen as really very important for most faculty who wanted students to create like high quality or multi-factor work. So when you have a project, a large project or a research paper, they would use scaffolding. And this one instructor said, scaffolding is super important. It helps to model a rhythm of research and keep them active over the duration of a project or assignment. So you have a student who may not be, have strong sense of self-regulation or strong skills in that area. But when you piece the assignment, you say, do this part and get feedback, do that part, do the other part, you're kind of throwing in that structure for them, where some students might just wait until the last week and then try to do this big project that they did not realize required multiple steps in order to complete effectively. So scaffolding is really important for helping students. Questions?
I don't see any.
Okay.
But if anybody has any, feel free to put them in the chat.
All right. Okay, so the key points, what we learned from this study. So we learned that students 45 years of age and white students had higher completion rates and grade point averages. And there may be many reasons for that. When I'm just thinking now, if you have students who are 45 plus years of age, you know, how old are their children? So they're less likely to have young children, maybe that gives them more time to really work on this. As far as white students, we don't have an incredibly diverse population. So Students who were more extrinsically motivated had lower completion rates than intrinsically motivated students. A variety of self-initiated regulation strategies were used: elaboration, goal setting, critical thinking, and time and place. So there was not one strategy that students used. There was also generally consistent feedback, and instructor contact was identified as important for self-regulation. So one thing that has come up in terms of my interviews, a few faculty have said, if a study is too rigid and too regimented with a very detailed learning contract or syllabus, that can minimize self-regulation because the student is being regulated by the course itself. Everything is being told to them and they just do what it says. So if it's too tight, that's a problem in terms of self-regulation. Also, if it's too loose and there's no boundaries, just do whatever, when that happens, the student doesn't really know what the expectations are. So they need something to identify and define what it is they are shooting for, that they need to be doing in order to optimally help them to self-regulate. Instructors understand the utility in certain courses as a way to cultivate critical thinking and goal setting. So they understand that they have to actually create assignments that will cause students to use goal setting and critical thinking. So our preliminary conclusions are that self-regulated learning does not begin and end with a student's disposition. That is, what they came with all of these great skills and they're just going to do well. It also, the course structure and practices of the instructor can also facilitate or discourage the use of self-regulated learning strategies. Our next steps are additional interviews. We're still continuing the interview process with students and instructors. We're also I'm looking at a content analysis of course syllabi to identify what items, learning goals, instructional activities are really connected to self-regulated learning strategies. And we're looking at recommendations for interventions and resources. So the ultimate goal of all of this work is to create a resource workshop, whatever it looks like, that students from whatever background they're from can come into to learn about self-regulated strategies and to begin to, on the front end, be able to help themselves, no matter what course they're going into. But we know that some come with more self-regulated learning strategies than others. One person I interviewed said that she noted that some students don't even know they can do certain things. They don't know that certain things are an option. For example, just reading a book versus marking it up and taking notes. Like, they just approach it, well, I read it, and then I did it, but they don't necessarily know the other things that they can do to help themselves learn, looking up further research sources, looking on YouTube for videos that explain. They don't necessarily know those are options that are available. So creating an intervention that will help students become more aware of self-regulated learning strategies that they might use is really our ultimate goal. And that is
Great.
it.
And you did have a question that I don't know if I overlooked it when you asked, but Roberta asked, are there due days for assignments? It's actually an interesting question because students, typically the faculty set those, or is that something students can negotiate, or how does that work?
It's something that students typically negotiate with faculty. And in the syllabi that I've been looking at, there's typically a window. So the course is so many weeks. Between week 2 and 5, you should have this done. Between week 5 and 7, you should have this done. And students can, in my discussions with faculty, they did say that students may be taking other courses, and so they want to know, well, what are your other big assignments, and let's work around those to make sure that you can meet this due date that you've set. So they have the students really involved in setting those due dates at the beginning of the term, not as you go, but planning ahead.
And then Elaine asks if you happen to reference the FIPSI Department of Ed research on student self-regulated learning, and she thinks the PI was John Hudsman.
That's in my notes. We may have. We may have, because remember, I'm working together with Lynette, so that may be something that she read that I didn't get a chance to read yet, but that's likely in here.
And then we still have a minute to transition to the next session, but Roberta asked if there's support for grading. Is there any support for grading? I'm not sure if
Yeah,
that
I'm not
means.
sure what, please expand on what that
Yeah,
question
do you
means.
mean other than the instructor grading? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know about support for grading. Students get a chance, as far as students are concerned, many of them are allowed to rewrite assignments in order to help boost their grade if they, did poorly. Many faculty use rubrics. That wasn't one of the high ones, but that was a strategy that many used in terms of grading, which is to use a rubric so that students can self-regulate by using the rubric to figure out what is the goal for each of the parts of the assignment.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Mhm.
It was a really interesting presentation, and it was striking to me how, like, a lot of the good advice that you had for, these kind of courses kind of applies to a lot of the courses, right? Students are going to do
Yeah,
better if they're intrinsically motivated, but especially in these courses. So
right.
great. Thank you so much.
Well,
We've been
thank
doing
you.
this today. I'm going to do a little
Okay.
clapping. Thanks, Julia. All right. So next up, Justin and Marie from, well, let me stop the recording.